We think about this issue then, this huge issue of suffering and God, and it is a vast subject. We only have a few minutes this morning to really get into it. So rather than go all over the place with it and look at all sorts of different things that sort of come up with this topic, I want us to really just look at that basic question that comes up. It might come up in your head, it comes up in mine sometimes. Why would a God who is all-powerful and perfectly loving, if such a God exists, why would he allow so much suffering and pain? Why would he allow that? And sometimes people, perhaps if you're a Christian and you get in, you sort of fancy having a conversation about these things with someone, they'll put that question to you because they want to get rid of you. And that is just their way of shutting the conversation down. Other times, though, for some people, it's a very personal question. It might be a very personal question for you right now. And so the question comes up, why would this all-powerful and loving God allow suffering and pain? Which is a fair question, it's a good question. But immediately, maybe the first thing I'd want to say is, and I want to say it extremely gently to someone who is going through it, someone who was going through the mill at the minute, I'd want to say that the question works on an assumption, making an assumption. The assumption is, for that question to work is, that the Christian God couldn't possibly have a perfectly good reason for allowing the suffering. All right, so the logic, if you like, right? Think of the logic. The logic goes like this: there's no way, of course, that a God would ever possibly be able to have a good enough reason to allow all the suffering that's happened in the world. So therefore, that God cannot exist. Now, what I want to see this morning from the Bible is that suffering, pain, can actually have a deep and profound meaning and purpose. That's the first thing I want us to think about. And that's not all, though. The second thing I want us to think about is how Christianity makes the case that God will and can and has proven that he can do something incredible about our suffering and our pain. Suffering can have meaning and purpose and value, and God is going to do something. God can do something. He's proven that he can do something incredible about our pain. Now, my claim is, I want to make the claim that Christianity outdoes, if you like, any other faith system, any other religion, any other belief system. When it comes to this issue of suffering and pain, it's got much better answers, especially much better answers than what most people in Wakefield today would believe, sort of modern, you might say secular people. Now, because everyone has to have an answer for this problem of suffering and pain, because everyone sees it at least, and everyone will experience it. So everyone's got to have some kind of answer. Every person in their homes, in the houses around us, they may not have written down what their answer is, but they'll be working with one. They will have a reason for why the suffering is here, what we should think about suffering and pain. Now, let's just think for a minute. Now, I don't want this to be like we're back at school, but stick with me. Let's just try to think what some of the popular views that are out there about suffering and pain, and they're out there in the big old world. Let's try to think what some of them are. So Buddhism, not a lot of Buddhism in Wakefield. I haven't found many Buddhists around in Wakefield, but popular world religion, of course. Buddhism says that your suffering, your terrible, terrible pain, isn't actually real. And what you really need to do is overcome your suffering and your pain by reaching enlightenment. All right? You need to get to enlightenment. And so here's the thing with that, really. It sounds good. It sounds, it's a popular idea. But that would mean, here's the tragedy of it. It would mean that the grieving parent has to come to the conclusion that their child who died, that their death wasn't real. Because all that this death does is it doesn't take us into the oneness. Buddhists believe this thing called oneness. Everything is connected. There's this oneness. And death isn't real because you just it's like a drop of water going back into an ocean. It's still there, it's just in the ocean because they believe in oneness. And so you've got to reach this state of enlightenment. Now, I don't think that's very comforting at all, actually. Maybe you might think I've got Buddhism wrong. You can come back to me in the question and answers later if I have. Islam, much more popular, of course, in the UK. Islam, it looks on a surface level a bit like Christianity, doesn't it? And when you sort of think about Islam's answer to Christianity, it can sound a bit like what the Bible says, but it's nowhere near as powerful, and it's nowhere near as careful and as nuanced as Christianity is. Because Islam says when it comes to suffering, the basic answer of Islam is, as I understand it, it is the will of Allah. And you have to, it's very fatalistic. You just have to accept it. It is the will of Allah. Again, you might want to come back at me, and there's others in the room I know who know far more about Islam than me, and can perhaps enlighten us. There's the view of karma, isn't there? There's an ancient view of karma, which is actually more popular today in a funny way than perhaps you'd realise. Because karma classically is that people are receiving in their suffering and their pain they're just desserts for wrongs done in a previous life. And it's interesting, you speak to modern people kind of do think now. They don't perhaps think it's the previous life so much, but people in their pain and their suffering are often experiencing what they deserve for something they've done wrong 10, 20, 30 years before. And they have this idea that maybe there's not a God, but there is this supernatural force in the cosmos that's doling out the punishment and putting everything, making everything right, evening up the scales. But most average people around here today, right? Most people in Wakefield are not any of them. They are what we might call secular people. And secular people, all it means is that these are people who have said, well, there may or may not be a God, but that's irrelevant. Secular means that you're getting rid of God from how you live your life, how you think about life, how you make your decisions on a day-to-day basis. God does not come into the equation, right? That's secularism. And people say we live in a secular society, don't we? So the spiritual, the supernatural God it may or may not be there, but it has nothing to do with my life. He's not going to make a jot of difference to how I live my life, right? And that's most people today. Now, secular people like that, people who are our neighbours, and maybe if you're with us in this room and you understand, yeah, that's me, that's where I'm at. People get a bit awkward and a bit squirmy when, is that a word, squirmy? Start to squirm when questions of religion and faith and supernatural, spiritual come up, don't we? Now, here we go. Here's sort of... a few years ago, I was in a training course, Leeds City Hall, and it was to do with my old job. So it wasn't a church thing, wasn't a Christian thing. And a room full of 30 people. And you have these icebreakers at the start of sort of a training course. Oh, the icebreakers. No one likes the icebreaker. I hate the icebreaker. Here was one, though. It's fascinating, really, because the facilitator, the leader of the group said, here's what I want you to do. I want you all to answer this question. What do you want out of life? What do you want from life? And you get the silly answers come out. But then after the silly ones come out, everyone went around the room, and to a man or woman, it's mostly women actually, they all said what they actually want when they really thought about it. And there was a kind of an interesting kind of serious atmosphere in the room. What we really want is to be happy, to live a long life, a long, happy life, and for our children to be happy. That's what they said about life. Couldn't believe it, really, that this came up in this training course. Well, it's just fascinating. That reveals what the modern person out there decides life is about. It is about being happy. That is the purpose of life. Interesting. I don't know if any of you've seen the Chernobyl TV series. I'm on Sky. Got to watch it over Christmas. Terrific, light-hearted Christmas viewing. And if you don't know the story, a dreadful joke about not wanting to spoil the ending. It'd be a terrible taste, wouldn't it? There's this scene where these men are sent out. They're called liquidators. They have to go to these abandoned villages to shoot all the animals. in case they're radiated, and they have to bury them under all this concrete. And anyway, at one point they sit down for lunch, and I think they're sharing some sausage or something, these three men, and they're doing this terrible job. And the camera zooms, sort of cuts back or whatever, and they're sat underneath this abandoned block of flats, Soviet flats, and there's this enormous banner, and it's in the, what is it, Cyrillic script? Is that what it's called? But so you can't. But the subtitle or something helps us know that it says, "For the happiness of all mankind." This enormous banner, and here are these men having to go around this abandoned village, killing the animals, and communism. It's not working. Of course, not long after that, the Berlin Wall fell, didn't it? And the Soviet Union was broken up. So communism got rid of the idea of God. It tried to suppress the idea of the supernatural, the spiritual existing. As soon as you get rid of God and the supernatural and the spiritual, here's the thing, right? As soon as you do that, which is what the communists do, it's what modern people do actually though as well today. What happens when suffering comes along? Where are you left when suffering comes along? What do you say about suffering? Here's what you say about suffering. You can say nothing about suffering. Suffering is useless. You have nothing good to say about suffering. Why? Because suffering stops the fun. Suffering stops the happiness. If all your life is about being happy in this life, suffering stops the fun, it stops the happiness. Not least, of course, death, the ultimate suffering. I saw a thing the other day. Some of you might be rugby fans. You might have just seen this on the news, actually. A former Leeds Rhinos rugby player, Rob Burrow, one of the best ever players, of his generation, been diagnosed with motor neurone disease. 37, my age, has a family, has children. And there was an interview just before Christmas that he did with a BBC journalist, and just the most heart-wrenching, awful interview to watch. Terribly painful, but he was just announcing the news. But just the other day, I saw a thing with a Sky News presenter, and the Sky News presenter was presenting Rob with 2 tickets. And plane tickets for him and his family to go over to America to watch the Super Bowl final, American football final. Rob Burrow, huge American football fan, dead excited for him to be able to go and see. Now, as I watched that, I thought, well, what a lovely gesture. Had a smile on my face. What a lovely thing to do. But it's bittersweet, isn't it? It's bittersweet. Because that is all our society can offer someone who has motor neurone disease and is facing death. That's all it can do. What does it do? So our society, it says here, let us make you even happier. For the time you have left, the short period of time you have left, we love you, Rob. We'll try and make you as happy as we can. Here's some tickets to go and watch the American football final. That's all it can say. That's all it can do. Because suffering and pain has no value or purpose for modern people. But Christianity, which actually is believed in by millions of people around the world today because of their suffering, not in spite of it, but because of their suffering, they believe in the Lord Jesus Christ. Christianity offers something far better than what our society offers. Far better. Has something far more comforting to say, and it makes a... It says that God has proven he can do something about suffering that our society would never be able to believe. It's that good. I'm going to come to those in a few minutes' time.